For 30 years, they've told us that the more grizzly bears and wolves that we have, the better off we're going to be. And we were sold this line through the term Trophic Cascade. Now with the Yellowstone study, when we put wolves in Yellowstone in 1995, that has proven all their claims to be true, and they're bulldozing ahead. Why don't we put more grizzly bears in California? And of course, we're going to add a few restrictions in Oregon to add more wolves, but it's all to benefit you, correct? Well, I'm going to show you how that is the exact way you end up with $50 per pound hamburger on your table or in your grocery store. And man, it's going to hurt your pocketbook when you go to California and find out you've put all the people that make your food out of business. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about an unbelievably intricate plan to use these two animals and the term Trophic Cascade to own the rights to the land that you are on, that your food is made from, and that you enjoy in the public. So let's get started. How does all this tie together? Well, let me explain a few things to you that are going on right now. Obviously, there is a very big problem with how we manage our wildlife. We are now we've been told, like I said in my opening, that the more grizzly bears and wolves we have, the better we are. That is a literal, factual untruth, or I guess it's impossibility to have anything managed with when you're managing for a number of predators. So right now, how they have to manage our wildlife is, and I'm talking about the agencies that manage our wildlife. So like Fish and Game, all those, Forest Service, they're supposed to be overseeing the public ground and the wildlife that lives on it and on the private ground. But how they're doing it is they have to take into consideration a specific number of predators. And we're not talking the smaller predators somewhat, but the large predators are definitely the ones with the restrictions, which is wolves and grizzly bears. Because they're on the endangered species list, and we now fight over in our states how many we should have, the focus has shifted completely from how much game we have, deer and elk, to how many predators we have. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I was trying to do the math because I was trying to figure out this, how should we manage our wild places with wolves and grizzly bears in them? So I'm trying to figure out mathematical possibilities of how you would do this, right? So you got, what do you try to keep 70% prey animals to 30% predators, or is it 85% prey animals to 15% predator? What would be the magic ratio? Here's the problem. Mathematically, it doesn't actually work out. Imagine if you owned a company and you're supposed to run that company. You are the one who makes all the decisions, right? And you're supposed to add to this bank account for the business. You're supposed to keep it level or add to it, which would be the game numbers, just so you make the association. And you're supposed to manage this thing. But you have an uncle who's an alcoholic and an aunt who has a gambling problem. And both of them have access to that bank account at any time, and you can't see how much they're taking out or when they're taking it out, even where they're taking it out. You are completely blind to that fact. You just have to assess, okay, now at some point there's going to be withdrawals all over the place, but they're going to be rational, right? Not from these two people. So you're like, okay, well, how do I manage the business, in a finite real world scenario to manage the level of money in that account when two people can make withdrawals on it whenever they want and they're not practical people? You can't. You can never manage that ecosystem because you don't know how many they're taking out. You can guess. You don't know when they're taking them out. Especially with wolves move 100 miles at a time, you don't know where they're taking them out. They might be taking out elk and deer over here, and you're trying to study over here. And then when you shift over here, they're back over. You never know. So it's actually mathematically impossible to manage your game in the wild places. Wildlife. We're starting out with wildlife. We're gonna get back to how this applies to the food on your plate and the dollar amount. These things, it's an impossibility. The only way you can manage your wild places with any kind of certainty is to actually manage for a specific number of prey animals, that being elk, deer, moose, etc. If you managed for that number and you didn't have to sustain a certain number of predators, then you would know I've got to keep the predator number low enough to where there's a limit on the other side of this bank account to where those two people can only take a very small amount. So I have a large enough chunk to keep the levels of game animals where they need to be. But that's not how we're doing it. Well, every state that has wolves is subject to a specific number of wolves they must have. And what they're talking about is that we have to sustain a certain number of wolves to sustain the population of wolves. Oh, there has to be this many wolves to sustain the population of wolves. Do you understand what I'm talking about here? You cannot manage the number of predators and expect there to be any sort of ecosystem left. They eat everything. So we have what's happened in Montana. So when you're looking at places like Colorado, which just, threw a whole bunch of wolves in there, and they're trying to bring the number of wolves up, and you look at California, who's now, what is it they're trying to do? California is now trying to add grizzly bears back to California. You've already added wolves. Wolves came in automatically, or on their own, not automatically. Let me see, I wrote that down. Where the heck is the California thing? Anyway, I'll find it because I need to show you. I need to tell you exactly what the actual bill is. They're trying to add grizzly bears back to the population, to the landscape in California. Now I wrote this down and then totally lost it. That's perfect. That is perfect. Doesn't help me a bit. Here we go. SB Senate Bill 1305. What it is trying to create another area of grizzly bears. So right now they have a couple areas, which is the Yellowstone area and the Northern Range area, and I think there's another one over in Region 1. They specify these as areas so that they can draw a boundary around them and then define a certain number of grizzly bears that have to exist in that area for them to come. Do you understand? Are you catching what I'm putting down here? Everything is about how many grizzly bears or how many wolves are in a certain area, with zero consideration to what they're doing to the game, the prey population. You can't manage a game herd like that. Well, you can. You just can't do it successfully. So what do we care about? Do we care about our wildlife as a whole, or do we want to leave the wolves alone? I hear that all the time in my comments, so I thought I'd throw that out there. Leave the world, leave the wolves, leave Mother Nature alone. Well, then you get chaos, and you get game herds so in Montana, we have the actual receipts. We have them in Idaho too, and probably Wyoming. I'm just not as familiar with the numbers down there. So what I'm talking about is, if you're wondering what's going to happen in states like California and Oregon and Washington, putting wolves and just protecting wolves and grizzly bears in those states, we can tell you because we know what's going to happen. We don't have to guess. Just look at the numbers of Montana. And everybody says, well, yeah, but there's more elk than ever. There's more elk than ever in Montana. And I would say, yes, there is. Woohoo. That would be a good thing. We have more elk than ever, not ever. In about 1905, Montana had almost hunted our elk population to extinction. It was down to 3,000 elk left in the state. Now, get this. This is very important to understand because that was the case across a lot of the West. And people say, yep, see there, problem with humans. But you know what? Humans you can actually regulate. So what they did is they stopped hunting like everywhere for subsistence and anybody could shoot anything at any time. And they put regulations. And you know what? People had to abide by them. And over the course of almost 120 years now, we have spent untold millions of dollars, time, sweat, blood, energy to transplant elk from Yellowstone to specific areas and then nurture those herds into massive herds of elk, mule deer, wild sheep. I mean, some of those things have not been that successful. Some of them have. But moose populations, we have taken time to put tons of money and energy into getting these herds thriving. And now, because of that, we have herds in Montana. We have a total population of elk of 170,000 elk, according to the numbers I'm reading. So why do I say that there's a wolf and a grizzly bear problem then? Why am I talking about this Trophic Cascade that's not true if you have more elk than any other time, except for before 1905? Well, here's the thing. You can't look at the total number of elk. You have to look at where the elk are actually overlapping with wolves and grizzly bears because I should add mountain lions in there. Even though they're not on the endangered species list, they are definitely a massive harvester of elk and deer. So you got to add that third relative who keeps sneaking in there and dipping out of that account. Okay, so you have this situation where people always say, well, there's more elk than ever, but they don't realize that in the mountainous public areas, our public lands, is where most of the wolves are. The reason they're there is because when they come off of there, they're immediately getting in trouble by eating livestock. So when they get off of the public land and eat livestock, they're forced back onto public land, either by killing them, they're getting shot. In the 3 states, you're allowed to hunt them, or the state wildlife officials are pushing them off. They're spending untold thousands, sometimes millions of dollars in ridiculous non-lethal methods to push these wolves back off of the private ground onto the public ground. So where are the elk going to go? They're going to go off of the public ground. So you got to understand that on private land, they have better feed. They have less predators because the predators are controlled. They have better water. They don't have to climb a mountain. Why would they ever go back onto the public ground where you've eliminated grazing in most areas, so they don't have good grass because elk prefer grass that has been grazed by cattle? You don't have good grazing on top of that because you've allowed your forests to overgrow in so many areas that now the amount of grass is even less. And you dumped in a whole bunch of predators that love to eat elk. So what do we have? We have the herds in the mountainous public regions dropping like flies. Then in the lower lands, like the pivot areas, the private lands, the flatter plains like out in eastern Montana or down in southern Idaho, you have herds of elk that are thriving. And that's because they're surviving. They're not being killed there. Not near as many, right? So this is why when I say we have more elk than ever, but you have to look at where they're at. I just released a video today. You can go watch it on my channel, this channel, where I went to a specific area, counted the number of baby calves that are making it through the winter. Now, obviously, this is not through the winter yet, so the numbers are skewed. And then I went to central Montana, where there's completely away from the wolves and the grizzly bears, and I discovered something pretty surprising out there. And first of all, I couldn't find the elk I was looking for right away. It took me a while. Almost gave up. Anyway, my point is that you have to count where the wolves and the elk are overlapping. And in that you find a massive problem, because where all these predators, where you have a huge basket of predators, a full one, on top of the elk, you end up with dismal results. Like in the Frank Church Wilderness over in Idaho, you started out with 11,500 elk in 1995, went dangerously low, down below 4,000, until we started hunting wolves over there, and the trappers started killing more and more of them, and lo and behold, the elk population starts going back up. Now, if you read the studies that are put out by wildlife biologists, especially in Yellowstone, it is a shocking thing to find out that the wolves have absolutely zero effect on populations of elk. Every time I read one of those, I'm like, wow, that is incredible. 42 wolves only killed 2 elk in 10 years. That is amazing. So read between the lines a little bit. You just have to look, where do the wolves overlap your elk populations? Then look at those elk populations and the number of calves surviving, and you get horrible numbers. The South Fork herd in Montana is part of, on the other side of the Bob Marshall Wilderness. It's in Region 1. And it used to have 5,000 elk in it in 1995. And last year, 2024, the count was around 300 left. These are elk, with a calf recruitment of 13 to 16%. That means only 13 out of 100 calves are surviving through the first winter. You don't even have a herd then. So when you're talking about this, the cost of wolves is very, very high, because what we're doing is we're saying we have to have this number of wolves and grizzly bears, and we're not accounting for where they are, how they overlap elk. There is no way to account for it. If you have to sustain a certain number of predators, you will not have prey left, because they will either leave or they will die. That's the way it works. So let's do some common sense thinking here. Now, let's move on, because I just spent too much time on that point. All right, so as a cowboy in Montana, I see what happens when we balance things by force, okay? And right now, we're trying to force a balance to something in Oregon. I talked a little bit about the grizzly bear introduction in California. What they're trying to do is make an area where they have to have a certain number of grizzlies. So as soon as they get that settled, if that passes, that means that it sets a target for the number of grizzly bears you have to have in that area. The one thing about grizzly bears is they're a problem in a lot of areas, in a lot of ways. They're not the same as the wolf, though, because they actually eat other things. So they eat grain, they eat, grubs and stuff like that. Wolves just eat meat. That's all they eat, and they do it year-round, okay? Now, one thing grizzly bears do is kill a lot of the baby calves when they're first born in the spring. The elk calves, they just search them out. They got great noses. All right, I'm getting lost on something else. Okay, so let's talk about Oregon. So Oregon right now is trying to pass a law. Now, first of all, they're trying to get it on the ballot so you can pass it. And in Oregon, it is called, it's actually Initiative Petition IP 28. The so-called, and get this, it's called the Peace Act. And the Peace Act makes it, you can sell it to someone because it's talking about animal cruelty. We're going to stop animal cruelty. Now, I'm going to show you how all this connects in the end, but I'm just saying this is what they're trying to pass. Stops animal cruelty. Well, that eliminates any hunting. That eliminates you raising animals on a property for food, because if you kill those animals to eat them, that is cruelty. You can't even, according to this thing, you can't even catch a fish for your supper. That is animal cruelty right there, against the law. It would actually become illegal to raise and kill livestock. It would become illegal to artificially inseminate your cattle. It'd be illegal to help a cow have her baby. So number one, you would have to kill all the animals, because once you pass this, there's no use for them. And if you think you're saving the animals, that would be the first step. They're going to either be sent out of state to get slaughtered, or they will all just die right there. And you won't even be able to use them for anything, because you can't touch them to do anything with them. So hunting, out. Raising animals, out. And you might say, you know what? That's good, because Those darn ranchers, they own so much land. Uh, they're just entitled, and boy, we just need to sock it to them. They're hard on animals anyway, right? Well, here's where you're missing something, because when you make ranching illegal, you're making the production of your food illegal. When you make the production of your food illegal, you cause the price of your food to skyrocket. Because guess what? If you're still going to eat, but you don't want to see where it's raised, that means it's raised a long way away from there, which means you have to import it. When you import something, there is added cost. In fact, there is more cost because if you import something, the state in which you live could possibly tax it as it's coming in, which adds to your cost. It's like the state of Washington. It's always shocking to me that people over there are ridiculously angry about the price of gasoline around the country and can't understand why when they drive across the border into Idaho, the price drops $1. That's because the state has put almost $1 worth of state taxes on top of your fuel. So when you are in that state, you have to pay $1 more. Now, they tell you it's from somewhere else, but just drive to Idaho. You'll see what I'm talking about. The same thing will happen with any of your food. When it crosses the border into your state, it could get taxed because guess what? You can't raise it in your state. So you won't be allowed to raise your own food to be self-sustainable either. This is what they're trying to pass. Honestly, this right here, this bill, is so ridiculous. I can't even imagine it being on the ballot. They need 117,000 signatures to get it on the ballot in Oregon. And they have 100,000 signatures on it already. And it's called the Peace Act. If you are one or know someone who has signed this thing, which is literally going to cost you an enormous amount of money at the grocery store level, you got to contact, we need to go back and undo this. So you got to contact, I don't have that either. No, I've got it right here. You have to contact the Oregon Secretary of State, and you can demand a signature of withdrawal form, which is called SEL 350 form, SEL 350 form, signature withdrawal form, and demand that your signature is withdrawn from that bill, IP 28. That is the biggest. Yeah, well, somebody says it's never going to happen. If they have 100,000 signatures already in the state of Oregon, then you might want to wonder a little bit more. 100,000 signatures is nothing to sneeze at, and I hope this thing never even comes close to a vote. Hope you're right. But if you are one, and here's the problem. They never sell this to you as actually what it is. Oh, hey, we're going to stop all the production of your food, all your protein as a protein mom. You're not going to be able to get it unless you pay extra for it. They're not going to sell it to you like that. They call the bill the Peace Act. The Peace Act. They tell you that you're saving animals. You're saving them from animal cruelty, and that's how you get 100,000 signatures. And if you don't think they can get more votes in Portland and some of those other cities to pass this thing without even realizing what they're doing, maybe you don't live there. Okay, so all of this is connected because here's how I always wondered, like, okay, we have this massive problem now of having to manage our wildlife by the number of predators instead of the number of prey. Because really the only way you can actually manage any of your wildlife is by managing the number of prey, not predators. You have to keep the predators low enough to keep the number of prey the same. If you're managing for a number of predator, you just lose it. Your money is just leaking out everywhere. The amount of you can't understand where it's going, but it's gone. Okay. So why the huge push for this to happen? Because right now we have wolves now in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, which are obviously the first three that we had them in. We have Washington State. We have them in Oregon, Northern California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and North or South Carolina for some very odd reason. That's where we have wolves, at least those states, in the lower 48. So why in the world do we have wolves everywhere, and we're pushing so hard to have these stringent numbers that we have to maintain of wolves? It didn't make sense to me either until I started looking into the global credit system. They have actually created a system that monetizes nature and allows massive global corporations through the world banks. I know, it's shocking. I couldn't believe it either until I looked it up. And how they do this is they're going to put these assets, they're going to assign biodiversity credits, is what they call them. Biodiversity credits assign a value to the biodiversity on the land where they're purchased. So if you've ever heard of a conservation easement, a conservation easement is something that a company comes in and buys on your land, and it puts a right on that land. They have the right to do certain things, and they stipulate what you can do on your land. Biodiversity credits are kind of the same thing, except for without actually purchasing that easement outright. It technically does, but it's it's through what's called credits. So you would think if you're selling biodiversity credits off of your property, and don't think they're not going to do this for public land, that you would think you're selling the credits. It's not actually doing anything. You're just producing the credits. Biodiversity, they're calculating how much biodiversity you have. They're paying you for having that much biodiversity, and then the credits are gone, and that's it. But that's not how it works. They create biodiversity credits, and I mean they, by global registry companies. You can look this up. These global registry companies decide what the value of the credit actually is. The TNFD is the group in London, the organization in London, I don't even know what it is, that actually writes the rules for what the value of these things is. And keep in mind, this is the goal. So we got to remove the rancher first, which is why you have bills like Oregon. You've got to install major predators, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So you got these biodiversity credits that are actually worth money, and they're produced every year from the land. So whoever owns the land then sells the credits to a buyer, which would be anybody who pollutes in the world. Any corporation is now under very high pressure to offset their footprint with pure nature credits. Started with carbon, now we're going to biodiversity. Biodiversity credits actually increase in value the more wolves and grizzly bears you have on them, because top tier predators are what's considered a multiplier for the value of the credits. Now, I hate to tell you this, but you as the human are actually a discount on the credits, especially hunters. But even hikers or campers are considered a discount because they produce what's called human disturbance. Okay, so you have these credits on the land. Now, who the heck would buy them? I just described to you. Anybody who pollutes, they're under pressure to offset their footprint. So they can then, instead of actually offsetting their footprint, they can purchase biodiversity credits and put them on their balance sheet. A balance sheet is what shows, here's my debts for a company and here's my assets. You got to have enough assets to offset your liabilities. That's what a balance sheet is. So if you can have assets that are basically sort of made up, called biodiversity credits, you can actually increase the value of your assets to where a bank will loan you more money because you have more assets on your account than you do liabilities. So it's a benefit to these companies to own them. And of course, the people who are selling them are just making a little bit of money as they sell the credits to these big, unbelievably global corporations. By global, do you mean foreign investors? Somebody says. So yes and no. If you're talking about a land trust company that's coming in and buying the land, often they use foreign investors to invest money into the project to purchase the land outright. And a lot of these land trusts are then going to sell biodiversity credits. They're already selling carbon credits, but they're going to sell biodiversity credits to pay back the price of the land and the investors. So everybody makes money except you. But how this works, okay, is that the credits of any kind that they sell, nature credits, do not just leave the land. They are actually tied to the land. So they are tied to the land that it sits on. So if you can have a piece of land that you can prove wolves are around and they are still on the endangered species list, that's how you got to get the highest value, is they have to be on the endangered species list, which is why they fight so hard to keep them on the endangered species list. Couldn't figure that out either until I discovered that. If they're on the list, they are actually worth way more. So let's say the top value of a biodiversity credit is $1,200 per credit, okay? And you can get one credit for every couple acres. And they use an algorithm to discover how much biodiversity is on the land, including wildlife, and they take into account all the stuff that the TNFD says brings value and what takes away. So if you have hunters on it, it takes away value of 15 to 30%, according to them. If you have camping or hiking or whatever, that takes off value too. So you can see how this would really hurt if this was done on public land, which they're not doing yet, as far as I can tell, except for they're trying to do that in Washington State right now. And if they've already gone through the court process, so they might actually be doing it now. I don't know. So if they can purchase these credits, they're not actually forced to eliminate human activity, but they get paid way more if you're not there. So here's how you work this. First, you have to eliminate the people who have cattle, because cattle to a biodiversity credit is actually a discount because that's considered human disturbance. Cattle is where your food comes from, or a large portion of where your protein comes from. So that and hogs and chickens are all discounts, I suspect. I know cattle are. So when you consider that a human disturbance, which is you, and your food source, and anything else you do, is a discount, but the wolf and the grizzly bear are a multiplier. That means they don't just add to it. They multiply the value of the credit to its highest value. No consideration is taken to how much game animals you have there, unless they're dead, because for some reason they're given a boost. If a wolf kills an elk, that's considered a benefit somehow because of the scavengers that can eat it. If a hunter kills one, that's extraction. Direct extractor of whatever's on there. So you can see how this would monetize something that would give a global industry an incentive to have wolves and grizzly bears on the land instead of you and cattle, right? Which, again, is your food source, which brings up the price of your food. So the less food we have, the less food we're raising, the more it's going to cost you. I'm trying to be simplistic about this, even though it's an unbelievably technical thing. And I'm just sharing with you what I've discovered and how I understand it. So we look at this and we go, that's ridiculous. Until you start looking at things that they're doing. The Trophic Cascade, complete farce. Trophic Cascade is the idea that wolves manage nature to a perfect balance. You get this idea from the experiment of putting wolves into Yellowstone Park. Now, Yellowstone Park used to have a herd of 19,000 elk, the largest elk herd in the world at the time. And then they put wolves in there. And lo and behold, 10 years later, you had a herd of less than 3,000 elk. So do the math quick. That's 16,000 elk you lost somewhere. Now, according to the study that they did after that, of course, it absolutely had nothing to do with the wolf, even though it corresponded exactly with the time frame that the wolf was there. Okay. But that's coincidental. It had nothing to court. It doesn't. I mean, the wolves only killed like 3 elk. I'm sure of it. So somehow we lost 16,000 elk. And because we did that, lo and behold, the overgrazing of the park was fixed magically. Now, if you remove 16,000 elk from a certain section of ground, you're going to have an overgrazing problem fixed, because they were overgrazing in the park. And they were overgrazing in the park because they had the ability to stay away from humans, and we weren't hunting that herd of elk. So because we couldn't hunt them, they were overpopulated, eating too much of the grass and willows. You've heard a lot about this, right? So you put wolves in there, they magically fix the entire problem, almost killing all the elk, until we started hunting them in hunting the wolves in 2009 outside the park. And lo and behold, we actually brought the population slightly back up since then to around 4,000. I go to the wild places and I go, man, this is fantastic. I would love to see what this looked like in 1805, right? And that's what really brings out that idea that, man, it would be so awesome. Back then, it wasn't humans doing they weren't doing anything wrong. We're just allowing nature to be nature. So why don't we introduce wolves and grizzly bears, and we'll have that back? Trophic Cascade, they fixed the problem. Well, here's the issue. In any other area where wolves were put, like in the Frank Church Wilderness or in Colorado, we don't have an overgrazing problem, because humans were already doing the work that they're wanting to say wolves do. Humans do the work of keeping the population of elk and deer down to the point where they don't overgraze. Now, people throw at me all the time, oh, but they're over objective or they're under objective. Objective has absolutely nothing to do, as far as I can tell, with actual capacity for grazing. Objectives are based on how many private landowners will deal with that many elk on their land, because they're eating stuff that their cattle can't eat. It's actually a conflict number, not this area will handle this many elk. So those really don't count in what I'm talking about. What we have to look at is, how do we produce wildlife in a sustainable way to abundance, at the same time keeping our food supply in a healthy production level, so that we can actually eat food that isn't horribly expensive, right? Good, healthy protein. So when you look at all of these things combined and you go, okay, that sounds ridiculous, until you look at Oregon trying to pass a law that eliminates ranching. Then you look at every state in the whole West trying to pass laws that put more wolves in every single state and set numbers for where they have to be. So in Montana, let me give you an idea. So somebody just said something interesting. I'm going to answer this question. It said, funny thing, gee, I wonder what this place looked like before it was overdeveloped and all nature. So here's the thing. When we start using our emotions about a fantasy of what something was like in 1805, it is fantastic to think about, but it does not apply to here and now. We now have 300 million people living in this country, and they need food. So it does not matter what it was in 1805. You cannot manage 1805. It is impossible. There are cities and people, highways, fences, food supplies, farmers, ranchers, cities all over the West. This is not the same environment or the same ecosystem that grizzly bears and wolves were in before. We cannot manage something that does not exist. So you can choose to try to manage something that doesn't exist, or you can say, here's what does exist. And what could we have? What could we have? Because I am a huge proponent of wildlife. I want there to be wild places left. But I don't want to mismanage it to where it all burns down, and everywhere we're managing for wolves and grizzly bears has absolutely no elk and deer left in it. That's what I want to avoid. And our food supply is so shot because we've eliminated enough ranchers that now our food is actually twice as expensive. Oh, we've already done that. Since 1980, we have put half of our ranchers in the United States out of business, and that has definitely not helped the price at the grocery store. Right now, we are at the lowest number of cattle that we have been in, that we've had in the country since 1940. And boy, that has helped the price as well, right? The more cattle we have, the less supply constraints we have. The more cattle we graze on public land, the more we actually produce the grass the elk like, and they stay more on public land. That is, if we eliminate enough predators so they actually desire to be on public land. A lot of times, hunters will even get angry with ranchers because they see the elk on the rancher's property, and they standing on public ground, and they're looking at something that's slightly grazed because somebody managed it from the Forest Service, or even heavily grazed on accident because they're not supposed to. And the elk are all on the private land. And they're like, that dirty rancher, it's his fault that there's no elk here. Well, here's the problem with that, is you're not taking into consideration that if you give an elk a choice, hey, why don't you go to this timbered area that doesn't have very good grass because you're not grazing it very much, and it's full of predators that are trying to eat me, or you can go down to this nice lowland ranch that raises alfalfa where the predators are actually limited and taken care of, and then wonder why that elk stays there. If you actually want to keep the elk on the public ground, you've got to eliminate a bunch of the barriers that keep the elk from going there. You have to create an environment where the elk want to be. Do you understand? So what we're doing right now is managing all wrong for real wildlife and just managing for something that essentially, as far as I can tell, just brings more value to the bottom line of a global company who wants to buy biodiversity credits. And guess what? If they buy the biodiversity credits, that's tied to the land for 200 years or so. 125 to 200 years is the permanence period for those credits. So think of those credits more as a contract for the land that's tied to the land. So that means they dictate what happens on the land. So if they own the credits, they being a global organization or a company, then the registry is actually the one that decides what their value is. And if they see you doing something that brings the value down, then they're going to pay the company less. So that company has an incentive to make sure that you are not on there, that there isn't cattle, and that there's more wolves and grizzly bears. Now, I'm not positive what happens when they eat all the elk and deer and then die, but okay. Let's go to some questions. I hope I'm making some sense here. This is all connected, and it's not a good idea. We have to stop thinking about our emotions and start thinking about reality. We have to start managing our wildlife for abundance and not predators. We have to realize that when the predator machine or the predator obsession that is attempting to put these things on the land, that they're actually getting you to do their dirty work. They're getting you emotionally stirred up. Oh no, look at the poor wolf that looks like a dog. Save him. They're not telling you to worry about the wildlife, because obviously you aren't if you're voting for the wolf. So, and you get into this circle, and I'm being a little sarcastic tonight, but that's because I kind of feel sarcasm. So you get into this cycle where you're managing for a specific number of wolves instead of managing for abundance of anything else. And when you do that, your drunk uncle ends up with all the money. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay? And he might be a global corporation. So when you wake up one day and it's illegal to raise cattle and it's off limits to most of the land, and you can't find the food in your grocery store even for any price, know that I told you right here what was happening. And if you want to keep voting for the things that continue to bring more and more grizzly bears and wolves into your states, I can't stop you. It is up to you guys. We have to stop the ridiculous notion that we can actually have Trophic Cascade. Humans, even though they make massive mistakes like eliminating the buffalo and almost eliminating the elk, are the only creature who can actually be used to manage the wildlife to its proper abundance. And that is by regulating how much they take, how many predators we have on the land, by shooting for a target of a specific number of the prey animals that we all love to see so much. That's the only way to do it. The rest is mathematically impossible, and it's only being monetized for somebody else, and that somebody else is not you. Let me take some questions. It's kind of been fun tonight. I've really been very sarcastic. I apologize, but I'm trying to just go for it, right? I'm drinking mushroom coffee tonight, and that's because if I drank real coffee, I would never be able to sleep. You know, it's not bad. It tastes a little like dirt. It's a little dirty. You know, they say earthy. What earthy means is dirt. But, you know, it's good. I actually think it gives you a little bit more mental clarity. I'm not positive, but I think so. And I'm not going to eliminate my coffee for it, but I will have a cup of this, maybe in the morning, to start out my day. I don't mind it at all. You know, coffee's kind of an acquired taste anyway, according to my wife. All right. What we have any questions in the gallery here? And if you want to get more information or really learn how this stuff works, then you want to go join my society, which is highlonesomesociety.com. That's where I go deep into what these are, or will be going deeper and deeper into how these things are actually connected and how they work, what we should do. And, you know, all the groups that are really working towards, you know, predator management have all capitulated to this one thing. How many, maybe we should set the target of wolves to this. Well, if we could just get it to that, you know, allow a quota of more, it's not going to work. It won't work until we actually manage for prey. Let me ask this. Let me look and see if there's any good questions here. Somebody says, are sheep good for beginners? You know, here's the problem with sheep. They're fantastic for beginners because they're easy to fence in, right? They love people, especially when they get used to people. They love people. I had a pet sheep when I was a kid, teenager, and that thing was so annoying because I couldn't do anything. That thing followed me everywhere. And as soon as you sat down, it would knock over anything you had with you and try to lick your face. And I mean, it was just annoying. So sheep are great in that way. You know, they don't try to break down all your fences like cattle and that kind of stuff. But you have to understand that everything likes to eat sheep. I'm not really sure why, but every single predator, the coyote on up, loves to eat sheep. So you do have to worry about them being protected. Dogs like to eat sheep. Well, maybe they don't. Maybe they like to just kill sheep and not eat them. But all right. Oh, so somebody's from Elk Heights in Washington, 10 miles east of Clayelm. So I used to haul horses over there to a kids camp off the coast of Washington several times a year. And so I went through that area. It's very beautiful. I do like Washington as far as the beauty of it. I couldn't quite handle the other side of the mountains, but even though the ocean is beautiful. Somebody asked me, somebody in the comments here is saying, just thanks me for doing this, bringing it to attention, and how do we talk about this before it gets extremely bad? That's really the issue, is like, how do we get this out? Because everybody is so afraid right now of saying anything about wolves or grizzly bears, or because they're afraid of the kickback. And you know what? I'm done with that, because I've seen what they do. Everybody focuses on what they do to ranchers, but actually they're forgetting that they're attacking your food supply. I talked to a rancher last week who said he lost 13% of his herd on his Forest Service lease to wolves, and that was acceptable. And I was like, are you kidding? That's acceptable? That's like $50,000. But it doesn't matter, because you have to deal with it right now. That's what I'm saying. We've gotten to this point where we think we have to deal with more predators. Well, looks like I need to go. So my daughter is here from college, and I better go say hi. All right. Anyway, I hope you guys had a good time listening to this incredibly serious subject, and the way I've presented it was sort of kind of, I don't know, sarcastically odd, the way I don't do that normally. Anyway, you guys have a good night. Go to highlonesomesociety.com or trinityvandenaker.com if you want to sponsor one of my videos. Until next time, you guys have a great night. God bless.